Good afternoon to all. My name is Luis Guillermo Solis. I'm the interim director of the Kimberly Green Latin American Caribbean Center here at Florida International University. Thank you very much for joining you this afternoon to talk about a fundamental issue of our time, and particularly in the hemispheric agenda of the Americas. The issue is migrations. And the way we're going to approach it is from our latest issue of our journal Hemisphere that you see here, the number 29, in which we analyzed migrations, the hardships of hope. We're going to approach a discussion of this issue by generating a series of webinars with the authors of the different articles that can be found here. You can see the virtual edition of Hemisphere in the LAC webpage. You can see it at LAC. You find it at lac.fiu.edu. We have the version there that you can check. And this is the first of 3 of these events that we're going to host. And I would like to say that as the guest editor of that number, I was privileged to work with a series of extraordinary scholars and practitioners who will be giving us throughout these webinars, these events, this fora, their perspectives of this complex situation that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people suffer every day. When they have to, they are displaced from their homelands, they have to travel in dire conditions to different lands, and then they face discrimination and rejection, but yet they continue to do so, given the conditions in which they live. So without any further ado, let me introduce the first speaker of today, Dr. Jose Miguel Cruz. Jose Miguel is the author of the feature article in the Hemisphere number 29, this issue. He wrote a piece entitled New Forms of Political Banishment, Central American Migration as Political Response. In the title itself, you can see the core of his argument. Migrations as banishment, and the way in which this affects politics. Jose Miguel Cruz is our Director for Research at the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center. He is a well-known expert on issues pertaining security and migrations. He's a foremost specialist in this field, one of the most recognized scholars in the United States and in the Americas, in the rest of the Americas. And he's also a person that has been deeply and personally engaged in his research, talking with migrants, visiting migrants, and understanding the migration phenomenon as very few people do. So, Jose Miguel, you have the floor. Thank you very much for joining us in this forum.
Thank you, Presidente. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you also for inviting me to write the feature article for Hemisphere for this year's Hemisphere, and thank you to you all for joining us in this the launch of the on the latest issue of Hemisphere. Let me try to share my screen so you can see the presentation I have prepared for this. So the article that I wrote for Hemisphere is based on a pilot study that we did last year, 2019, in Mexico with Central American migrants. A group of colleagues here at FIU and I were very much puzzled and wanted to know the conditions under which many of the Central Americans who decided to join the caravans, the migrant caravans that started in 2018, we wanted to know the conditions why they decided to live and the conditions under which they took over, this hardship. So what I'm going to do is present some of the results of that pilot study, which are reflected in the article, in the feature article of Hemisphere. Um, and basically, it focused on uh, examining Central American migration as a political response to the situation in Central America. Let me start with the story of Diana. Diana is, I'm using a fictitious name, and this is the story of a migrant woman, which I met in an interview in a refugee shelter in Mexico City in August 2018. Um, Diana is a Honduran, was a Honduran migrant who was traveling with her whole family, 3 children and her husband. And basically, I met her in this shelter where she was recovering from a surgery. The surgery uh, was needed basically to attend some of the consequences of walking for many, many miles throughout Mexico. When I asked her for her story, why she decided to leave Honduras, she told me how she had a small but thriving business, a small shop in right in front of the campus of the Universidad Nacional de Honduras, in National University of Honduras, right? And if some of you will remember, a couple of years ago, there were a lot of protests in Honduras because of the privatization of the health system in Honduras. So those protests basically evolved and basically grew, and the university closed. When the university closed, basically her business went down. But in her business, she had was being extorted by MS-13, by gangs, right? Once she closed her business, she was unable to continue paying, the extortion, or what they call in Honduras el impuesto de guerra, right? Uh, and because she couldn't do the first, one of the payments of the extortion, basically the gang came and assaulted her partner, right, her husband. um, she was so upset about that, right, that she decided to go to the police. She decided to report that to the police because her husband was badly injured, right. The problem was that when she went to the police basically tipped off the gang itself. Basically told the gang members about that. So the same day she reported, this event to the police, the gang came, the gang raped her, assaulted her husband again, and basically told her, "Look, I mean, you need to leave. You can no longer. This is not your home anymore. We're going to take over this home." So that night, she, with her family, decided to join one of the caravans coming to the U.S. Right. And when she was telling me her story, basically it was, as you can see, it's a hard story, right? But she kept her cool. Let's say she kept calm throughout the story. But at the moment in which she started to cry was when she told me, I was so gullible. I went to the police. I went to the police thinking that they will help me, and they betray me. Mm. They basically handed me over to the gang, right? It's impossible to trust the police in Honduras. And with that, I decided to leave. In that moment, she was crying, 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 crying. And what was seeing there was this frustration, this deep frustration about, the institutions and the political system. So why I'm telling this? Because there is a twist in the stories of migration, which is usually not viewed, not seen. Right? Usually we analyze the phenomenon of migration, especially Central American migration, focus on the hardships and economic hardships, or security hardship exclusively, right? I mean, after all, people leave or exit their countries because they don't have employment, they are poor, they don't have opportunities, and on top of that, they're usually extorted and threatened by gangs, right? Uh, so what her story was telling me, actually there was something else, right? And that something else had to do with institution, with the way institutions work in Central America, right? We have to remember that many Central Americans, especially those in the Northern Triangle, live in what one of my mentors, Ignacio Martin Baró, the Jesuit psychologist, used to write about. He called the permanent vital emergency. He said that Central Americans live under a permanent vital emergency, right, all the time. Poor, with very unsafe conditions, right? Uh, these basically create the conditions for them, for many of them, to live, right? And there is a long story of poverty, of insecurity, and even natural disasters that compound the situation, their situation in Central America. Now, if you are familiar with the Central American history, you will know that in the 1990s, there were a lot of political promises, basically based on political transitions that happened in most of the countries in Central America, right? Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua, all these countries went through political transitions, which basically sought to create institutions to strengthen the rule of law and promote people's welfare, right? Um, and basically, these political transitions also revolve around the establishment of electoral democracies, which at the same time generate a lot of expectations among Central Americans, especially Salvadorians, Hondurans, Guatemalans, right? However, as I said, if you know the political history in Central America, you all know that some of those political reforms, basically, we can say that, looking at the situation, have failed, right? And they failed because corrupt operators, holdovers from the previous regimes, basically eroded the potential of those political reforms, right? Accountability mechanisms were weakened, and institutions fail to reduce impunity, right? Or even to curtail those effects of exclusionary economic policies. You can see one of the best examples of that, what we see in Guatemala with the CICIG right now, right? The CICIG did such a great job fighting impunity that the traditional elites in Guatemala, political, economic elites, basically worked very hard to push CICIG out of the country. And now Guatemala is sort of unraveling in this dynamic of corruption with, the previous with previous operators basically coming back to power, right? So where am I going with this? It is that some years ago, um, uh, uh, an economist and political scientist, Albert Hirschman, said that when people are disenchanted with their political system, usually they have two routes, right? Two ways of expressing that frustration with the political system. In a democracy, what they usually do is they vote and they change the government, right? They will vote and they change the government. But if they vote and still things don't change, which is the typical situation in sort of flawed democracies or authoritarian regime, many of them basically think of leaving and exiting the political system, exiting the society, right? So that's what we're seeing to some extent in Central America. Political system does not provide for many Central Americans, right? And facing the inability to change the social and political situation, they come to the conclusion that they should leave. So one of the things is that the politics is at the root of the problem of migration in the region. And as I said at the beginning, we conducted this pilot study in Mexico in which we interview more than 100 migrants, Hondurans, Salvadorians, Guatemalans, and a few Nicaraguans, basically to ask them why they have left, right, their countries. At the same time, we ask them a series of questions that we have been asking in political surveys all around the region, right? Using, for instance, the surveys that LAPOP has done in each country. So we wanted to compare how people responded to these kind of political surveys, compare these to the surveys of LAPOP, for instance. And let me show you some of the results here. What you're seeing there is a table comparing the opinions on the political system between our migrant sample. I have to say we have to take this very carefully. This in any way represents all the migrants. It's just a fraction, actually, but it's enough to provide us a comparison, an idea how different are the views. You see a comparison between the migrants that we interview in Mexico in different shelters in Mexico City, in Tapachula, and in Toluca, and the results of the national surveys that LAPOP has conducted in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. So if you're looking at the table, you see, for instance, that when we ask them whether they believe, whether they believe that their basic rights are well protected by the political system of their country, among our migrants, only 6% said that their rights were well protected by the political system. In comparison, in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, although low for the national sample, still the difference is very notable. Is obvious, right? In El Salvador, it's 27%, in Guatemala, 26%, in Honduras, 24%, right? The same if you go through all the items, right? And I want to call your attention or bring your attention to the item of feel proud to live under the political system of their country. So among the migrants, almost 9% said that they felt proud to live under the political system. But that percentages within the national populations is more than a third of the population. So there is a huge difference, right, between those migrants in which even the trust or even the support to the political system is lower than the one that we find in the general population. You can see those differences are also very similar when we talk about the specific support to institutions, right? For instance, trust the president of their country, right? Among the migrants, 11% trust their presidents, right? Whereas in Honduras, 28%. The National Congress, 6% among the migrants, in comparison with almost 32% among Salvadorians, right? And you can see in one of the more significant differences between the trust in the national police in their home country, right? Only 8% of the migrants trusted their national police. In comparison, 44% do that in El Salvador. So what is my point? My point is that many Central Americans, on top of all these problems of safety, of lack of economic opportunities, many Central Americans leave the country because they have concluded that their political societies do not protect their rights. Neither do they advance their well-being. So the only option they have, as you can see it in the story of Diana, is leaving the country, because otherwise they face basically a very, very threatening situation in their own countries. With this, I conclude these remarks, and thank you all for your attention. Presidente, the mic.
Sorry, always forget to unmute. Let me just tell you that in this issue of Hemisphere, we also have articles on the Venezuelan migratory crisis and the impact in Colombia. We have Bolivian immigrants in Argentina. I shared the experience of Costa Rica with Cuban and Haitian migrants. We have also a piece on Nicaraguan migrants into Costa Rica, and then three very important broader trends. One, population movements and climate change. Another one on women migrants in Latin America. Another one of HIV, drug epidemics, immigrant ethics, sexual minorities, and tourism in South Florida. So we have a very complete outlook of different expressions of people movement, of migrants in the hemisphere. So we're going to be addressing these issues in three different events. But today, allow me to introduce Dr. Roody Reserve, who is currently the director of the master's program in political science at the Central American University, UCA, in El Salvador, Universidad Centroamericana. Roody Reserve holds a PhD in political science from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. He works on comparative politics. He has researched issues pertaining violence, political violence, parties and political party systems, and public opinion. He has researched also public policies to evaluate social programs, and applied research in university teaching and in a number of other fields. He is Haitian, and he wrote the article on Haitians in Chile, which is obviously a very interesting case to be analyzed, and he will tell us why. So I thank Roody for his piece, and now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President Solis, and thank you everyone for joining us in this discussion. And for me, I was really happy to receive the invitation to participate in this number of Hemisphere, because I have been sort of researching on migration, Haitian migration, but I never had the opportunity to actually sit down and have something, write down something on this subject. And I was living in Chile in 2010, when Haitian began to arrive in Chile. And I will be addressing this situation, talking about my own experiences with these migrants in Chile. And I was, at some point, I went to Haiti, and I took the opportunity to went to the border and talked with some Haitian. We are coming from Dominican Republic. And I had all these materials, and I still have them, and that was for me a good opportunity to actually, like I was saying, to write down something on Haitian migration. So I will be mostly talking about Chile. Let me see my presentation. But I will try also to draw a broad comparison, or to see broadly the situation of Haitian migrant, and sometimes I would say even the situation of migrants, poor migrants in general, in Latin America and around the world. So let me see how I can do that. Okay. Yeah. So as I said, I was in Chile, and I was trying to help Haitians who were coming because they don't speak Spanish, and we had a Spanish-speaking language, Spanish-speaking sessions for them, and at the end, I took opportunity to talk to them, and some moment recorded them, and that's what I will be sharing with you. And the first thing we need to address is, or let me say broadly, I will be speaking about 3 topics in this presentation. I will be talking about the importance of immigration for Haiti and Haitians. I will be talking about the hardship that Haitians face in the settlement countries. And finally, I will be talking about what can be done to ease the burden of racism that they face. And I think that can be applied in general for migrants, poor migrants in settlement country, also, while I will be referring to the Haitian case. The first thing, this is, I don't know if you can see it very well, but I will explain a little bit, describe this map rapidly. This is a map that a Haitian geographer drew in 1982, and he was trying to show the spread of the Haitian diaspora. And what we can see, even you can't see the name, but what the idea you should have from this map is Haitian are everywhere. And in this situation, we can go back even to the beginning of the 20th century, and we find Haitian mostly everywhere, in Europe, in the Americas, and Africa, etc. And lately, since 2010, after the earthquake that ravaged Haiti, Haitian have been going to South America. So now we have almost 200,000 Haitian in Chile, and maybe 50,000 in Brazil, and so on. And we have Haitian in Panama, and Colombia, and Venezuela, etc., etc. So Haitian have a deep experience with migration, and the diaspora, Haitian diaspora, is everywhere in the world, and ultimately mostly in South America, also in Dominican Republic. And this is why Haitians are leaving. Haitians are leaving because the situation, political, economic situation is very difficult in Haiti. Miguel was talking about what Hirschman said, exit or voice or exit. And when I was writing this article, I was thinking also about this piece. And the idea I give in this article is Haitian has been trying everything. First thing, they after 1986, they tried to change the political situation. And we have seen, for example, they voted for Aristide in 1990, and they have been trying since then to change the situation. And they not only they vote, they also protest. In fact, Haiti is one of the countries, according to Le Pop, the Barometers of America, Haiti is one of the countries where there are more people engaging in civic participation. Now, there are many protests in Haiti. Sometimes they are violent protests, but in general, people try to engage in the political situation to change the country. But these have been a futile situation, because they fight and they can't change the political situation, and finally they decide to leave the country. And that the situation, because they leave, because they can't change the from within the situation. And the public opinion data, for example, show that at least 50% of Haitians reported that their household receive remittances from family members or friends living abroad. So Haitians don't just live as, in general, this is the situation in Central America, in general around the world, migrants don't just live, but they keep sending back money to support the country and their families in their country. And in Haiti, many people depend on the remittances that the migrants are sending back to them, to their family, to their father, their wife, etc., their partners. And we can see in this slide, 33% of Haitian GDP depend on remittances. And we can see, like, this is huge. This is the most, the highest in the region. We compare with Honduras, El Salvador, etc. We see this is the highest in the region. And why people are leaving? Because of this dire situation, and immigration is one of the few options left to young Haitians in face of this political tension, repression, and dire economic situation. So this is very important for the country, because if people don't leave, they literally are dying of hunger and repression and everything. And what it is important to point out also, not only the families are living on the migrant, the political elite also, and the economical elite. Because we see when people send remittance, they send money, and what the economical elite do with this money, they try to speculate with the money, and we have seen the situation lately with the Haitian currency. So the elite also, economical elites are living on the migrant that left Haiti, and this is important for them in order to keep doing business. And apart from the political situation, the dire economic situation, natural disaster also are pushing Haitian out of the country. So people need to move, because when hurricanes strike, they left everything. For example, we see that in 2010, we had the earthquakes. In 2008, Hurricane Faye, Gustav, Anna, and Ike devastated, for example, Gonaïve, where $1 billion in economic damages were estimated from this devastation left by this hurricane. So, and with what happened with the earthquake, we have a Haiti lost $8 billion from its GDP in just 2 years. This is huge. We are talking about a very poor country. So people have to live, and the country and Haitian and the economic elite and the political elite keep living on them. But when they arrive to the settlement countries, what they find in general is, again, dire situation. The first thing, they are usually do jobs that the local citizens do not want to do. So they work in farm, they work in construction. They are construction workers, they in gas stations and everything, or they sell in the streets. And because they are Black, Haitian, and mostly they are Black, and they do not speak the language, and they do all this kind of work, and they are the poorest in this country, and they are victims of racism, xenophobia, and all kind of discrimination. And I mean, this is interesting because they live because they are looking for a better situation, and they arrive at the settlement countries, and they face mostly they are in very stressing situation because they are victim of racism and xenophobia. And this is interesting to say because in 2010, I was interviewing people, Haitian coming to Chile, and in general, they were confident about their situation. They would say it's difficult because of, they don't speak Spanish, difficult because of the climate, and it was cold at that time, but they would say in general people were good with them, and they envision they could change their situation and work and live peacefully in Chile. But what was in 2010, the beginning of the migration, Haitian migration to Chile, it changed dramatically, like in 8 years. At late of, in 2018, or let's say in 2012, for example, the census in Chile did not even list Haitian among foreigners residing in Chile. But in 2018, there were 179,000, or almost 180,000 Haitian in Chile. They represented 14% of all foreigners living in Chile after Venezuelan and Peruvian. At this point, Haitians started experiencing xenophobia and racism in Chile. And this is interesting because many of them, not that much, but a few of them, let's say, decided to go back to Haiti because, for example, last year in 2018, because of this situation and the new government, right-wing government in Chile, and the way they were talking about the Haitian, and a few of them decided to go back to Haiti because they could not stand the racism they were facing in Chile. And in this situation, and I was thinking, well, what can we say to better the human situation, what people are living, and they are hardworking people, but they have many psychological stress because of the racism, of the xenophobia. Many are using the social media to vent against Haitian. And I think the pandemic in generally has shown is something very important. One thing is, migrant play an important role in the economy of the settlement countries. And this is, we can say that talking about Haitian, but mostly about all migrants, because as I said at the beginning, they generally work in industries that were deemed essential during this lockdown. But they are still portrayed as burden on the local's economy, healthcare, education, and social services. Even many think they are criminals. So the discussion in general about migrants usually focus on what they are taking, allegedly taking from the country, and not what are they giving to the country. I think what we can do as a scholar in this situation is try and I think rightly this issue, this hemisphere issue, help us to address the situation, and first as scholar to point out the situation of this migrant, and two, maybe next time try to show their contribution for this country. In general, they are young. In the case of Haitian, and in general migrant, they are young. They don't use the healthcare or social services, even education. I was talking recently with an Haitian migrant in Chile, and he was a he was someone who was working on education in Haiti. He has a bachelor degree on education. And I was asking him, why you don't go back to school and try to better your situation, because he's working on a farm in Chile and picking fruits. And he said, I want to go back to school, but because of my work schedule, it's very impossible for me to go back to school, because I don't know when I'm going to have a job, and when they are gonna need me, and I need to send money back to my family. So I can't have the luxury to go back to school. And this is just an example to show that people generally don't use the education system or the social services or healthcare system. So we need to address that as scholar and try to bring the focus on what people are bringing and how they are contributing to these settlement countries. And I think that's something we can do also with a civic organization that mostly try to help migrants and try to change the discussion about a migrant in these host countries. So I think this is, we should take the opportunity and to try to further the discussion about the presence of migrants in these countries. And this is, I mean, this is important also for Latin America, because Latin America, in Chile, in general, Argentina or Brazil, they have experiences with people coming from outside to this country, but they were in general migrants from Europe. We have seen that, for example, in the case of Chile or Argentina, these migration from Haitian, Black Haitian to this country is new. So I think this is important also to try to diffuse this idea that there are some superiority, race superiority that are ingrained in these societies. So I think, again, as scholar, we can contribute to change the discussion about these migrants. Thank you very much. We can't hear you.
Once again, mute. Okay, I'm sorry. I would like to thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Reserve, and invite all of those that would like to convey your questions, please do it through the chat, and I'll handle that through the chat. And just to give you some time to write your questions, let me ask Jose Miguel and Rudy a couple of questions regarding their presentations. Jose Miguel, you're an expert on gangs. You have studied migrations a lot, but you have also studied gangs. And I've always been very surprised by the way poor people in gangs relate to poor people in migrations. I mean, they exploit them, they violate their rights, they impose violence against them. What can you tell us about this relationship between gangs and migrants, especially since we're talking of migrants that travel, say, from Honduras or from El Salvador through Guatemala into Mexico, and they face the reality of gang violence and other forms of violence, of course, including being subject to official repression by policemen and members of the armed forces. But what's that? How does that relationship between gangs and migrants take form?
Thank you, Presidente. I think that to understand this relationship between gangs and migrants, we have to start considering or taking into account the deeply unequal that most Central American societies are, right? We're talking of societies in which you have huge gaps, economic, social, race gaps, in which despite some development, despite some advancement in terms of the economy and even political rights, these are very unequal societies in which a lot of people live still in very dire conditions. So gangs and people and migrants share this space of scarcity, share this space of need. Gangs basically emerge from these areas, these exclusion marginal areas, in which also migrants live, right? And since they share this space, well, gangs end up victimizing, right? Victimizing their own population. It is an irony that when you think, for instance, thinking the phenomenon of gangs in Central America, right? What the scholarly literature usually say is that when you have these criminal organizations that thrive, usually these criminal organizations are linked to the existence of some resources, right? For instance, let's say, or you think about criminal organizations in Colombia, in Mexico, in different parts, but you think criminal organization basically preying on the illegal markets of drugs or illegal markets of some commodities like oil, gold, this kind of thing. But when you think in Central America, well, Central America really doesn't have any important sort of commodity, right, other than the coffee. But the only commodity that Central Americans have is cash coming from remittances, right? And that cash coming from remittances basically is available, let me say this carefully, available in those areas which basically are dependent on the migrants, right? People who live in communities in which migrants have come to the United States, have gone to Europe, right? Send them remittances, and basically gangs try to, gangs prey of those remittances or that cash, not on drugs, not on oil, not on gold, not on those, typical commodities, but in the cash that is coming to poor families, right? So going back to your question, it is an irony, but still it reflects these structures, social structures in Central America that force, victims and victimizers to share these spaces.
Thank you, Jose Miguel. It's very interesting because there's this other dimension of crime in Central America, which is transnational organized crime, and we know that sometimes migrants are used as to generate petty cash for these criminal organizations that, because of whatever circumstances, see their markets suppressed momentarily, and then they use the migrants. They kidnap migrants, and they use them as Jose Miguel was very well saying, as their own sources for revenue. And then there's the other big international criminal phenomenon related to migrations, which is human trafficking. That's a different thing. These are poor people in gangs exploiting poor people, migrants. Roody, I was very much touched by your reference to racism. We see migrants that are being exploited because of their conditions, because they come from afar, because they reach the communities in very vulnerable situations. But then in some cases, and this is clearly the case with Haitians, they also have to endure the fact that they're Black, and that there is another problem, racism, that they have to put up with. In a society like the Chilean society, which is very homogeneous, and where Black populations were not generally present as they are in Uruguay or in Peru or in Venezuela or Brazil, this should have been a larger issue. Can you elaborate a little bit more, please, on how the question of racism in Haitian migrants in Chile manifested itself?
Thank you. This is very interesting because at the beginning, it wasn't an issue, let's say. At least if we could, let's say about 2010 and 2011, if we could talk about racism against Haitian in Chile, we would say it was mild racism. And because the earthquake in Haiti was in 2010, and Chile also experienced an earthquake in 2010, and people were very sympathetic to Haitian coming from this situation. And in my interviews, many Haitian would tell me they started thinking to go to Chile because they had friends from the military in Chile. And many of them come with the militaries, these friends, and they came to Chile. And people were very sympathetic. And I remember they even organized an event, telethon to support Haitian. And that was.
Let me interrupt you, really on this, just to make a note. You say that they were friends with the military because there were many Chilean military in Haiti during the MINUSTA operations, I suppose.
Yes.
So the United Nations operations, blue helmets, Chilean blue helmets in Haiti, and then they returned to Chile and they had friends. I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. Because, I mean, Chile has a long history with earthquake, and people were very sympathetic, and they see we had the same situation in the 60s where the country was not prepared to earthquakes, so we have this situation, and they were helping Haitian coming into Chile. And in this situation, people kept coming. And as I said, in like 5-6 years, you have the population go like a 10-fold or 20-fold to in Chile. that at this point they started talking about Haitian are coming to take their job. I mean, I'm not saying all Chileans think that, but this discussion on social media and about Haitian in Chile and what they are coming for, and they should go back to their country, and etc. So, and you see the political right, some political elite try to use this situation and to stoke the racism and these languages against Haitian and Chile. But it's the same situation and Dominican Republic also. We have seen the situation, and actually many Haitian start moving from Dominican Republic to Chile because of a decision made by the political elite in Dominican Republic that deprive Haitian of their nationality and citizenship in Dominican Republic. So I think we can talk about two moments. A moment of mild racism, let's say, people were sympathetic, they were trying to help, and many would say they are poor people and they need our support, etc. But when people start coming in flux, and that's the moment they began talking about there are too many people and the country is changing radically. We see a new these new people, etc. Yeah. So that's the situation, and because in Chile they were more they had more experience with people coming from Europe. We can see at the same time, because we were the crash from 2008, 2009 economic crash, many people were coming from Spain. And we never heard this discussion about so many people coming. And there is this point that it's sometimes deep in this society about how they perceive Black people. And Haitians do not speak Spanish. And we see the situation also because a few years after, people from Venezuela, because of the collapse of the situation, economic and political situation in Venezuela, and you see that in general, the discussion is not the same discussion about migrants, even though we can say also there are racism, xenophobia, mostly xenophobia, xenophobic thought, not racism, that's different, against Venezuelan and Colombian and people from Dominican Republic also, and Chile. But in the case of Haitian, we have two things. We have xenophobia and we have racism in this.
That's a very important distinction that you make between xenophobia, which is experienced by most migrant populations, and this added phenomenon of racism. Let me allow for three interventions. One's from Mr. Venante Standback that says that at times Haitian immigrants would rather face humiliation in a foreign country than in their own country of birth. Then our colleague and also the executive editor of Hemisphere and the associate editor is Liesl Picard, asks if you can both talk about general trends relating to integration of migrants in their new countries, in the countries that welcome them. How do they integrate to the population? Through marriage? Do they have families? What's the situation with language? Roody mentioned language is very important. Haitians speak Creole, Haitian Creole. Do they essentially live in enclaves, or do they tend to integrate more? And then I would like also to give the floor to Maria Luisa Beizaga, whom I saw raising her hand. I don't know if she's there still, but at least we have these two questions. Let me read Jean Rosenberg's question also. It says that most US citizens view migration through an economic lens. But there are multiple drivers, including security, crime, politics, corruption, equities. So what is the path forward? Okay, I see Maria Luisa Beizaga. So Jean on the path forward for migrations, Liesel on integration, and Maria Luisa Beizaga, please.
Okay. Should I start?
You're muted.
I have a comment and two questions for Dr. Reserve. Is that okay?
Yes, can you do the comments small, short so that we can participate more?
Dr. Reserve, I have two questions regarding Haitian migration in Chile. Where do they come from? From South America. Most of some of them I know they come from Brazil, and they come through Brazil, and then they go to Buenos Aires, then to Mendoza, and then cross to Chile. And also where in Chile you interview them, in Santiago and also in Iquique in the north. I know there's a big population. What about in the south? And a short comment, it's also hard for the Chileans to go to high school or university, since in Chile the system is private. So imagine the migrants from that. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Beizaga. Let's hear it from Jose Miguel. We have Maria Luisa's comment, and then Liesel on integration, and Jean Rosenberg's the way forward. What are we to expect from this situation?
Thank you, Presidente. Thank you, Liesel. Let me address Liesel's question and Jean's questions on the migrants. In the case of Central American migrants in the United States, certainly the process of integration tend to be a little bit more slow and sort of protracted that with other nationalities. However, there is this notion that Central Americans migrants don't integrate. And according to several studies, that's false. I mean, they do integrate, they end up integrating. It takes more time, but they integrate especially through, their new generations, right? Second generation Central Americans, their sons, their daughters, their children basically are the ones leading the integration in the new societies. There are certainly enclaves, and there are communities, recognized communities of Central Americans, right? We can, here in Miami, we recognize Homestead as a sort of enclave of Central Americans. But there are also cities in which you see a large concentration of Central Americans around the DC area, Houston, several cities in California. So there are integration, right? But it's sort of more, it takes more time, but it happens. And it happens, and according to the specialists who have been studying migrant communities here, they do integrate. Maybe the other difference is that they do not necessarily drop the language as other communities have done, especially from Europe. They tend to keep the language. And I think because of the demographic changes in the United States and because of the growth of Hispanic community in the United States, I mean, the drop of the Spanish will be harder, and they will basically become more bilingual rather than just choose English. Now, on Jean's question on what is the path forward, I think what is important to recognize, especially in the case of the Central American migrants, is that Central American migrants tend to be viewed as basically as an economic phenomenon, as being pushed by the economic situation in Central America. And although that might be in part true, I think it is very important to recognize that Central American migrants, and increasingly so in the last 10 years, and I think that will increase even more. Many of these Central American migrants are leaving their countries because their political systems and their political societies are becoming again increasingly exclusionary, is increasingly marginalizing. So they don't find spaces. I mean, we can see it in the case of Nicaraguans, right? Nicaragua is definitely transitioning into a full-fledged dictatorship, right? But what the changes that we've seen in Honduras, changes that we have seen, political changes we've seen in El Salvador, in which civil liberties have been restricted, human rights are increasingly violated. We have to recognize that these migrants are also political migrants, right? They are fleeing their countries because because the political system are unable to offer and provide the basic rights protections, right? This not only has to do with the economy, but with an ability to basically seek well-being and political liberties in their own countries.
Thank you very much, Jose Miguel. Rudy, we have the three questions. We have the issue on integration. Do they integrate? Do they live in bubbles? We have the question of the way forward and the questions that Professor Veizaga also made directly to you. Please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the question. And let's maybe begin by what Benante Steinbach said, that at time Haitian migrants would rather face humiliation in a foreign country than in their own country of birth. I think this is true for all migrants, because finally the dire situation they face in their country, and after, as I said at the beginning, and they have been trying to change the political situation, and they can't. And the only thing they keep finding is setback and disasters and political disasters, economic disasters, etc. So they just decide to leave, and this is the situation for all poor migrants, I think. And at least I would say, from a psychological point, maybe it's easier. I don't know. Maybe it's easier to face discrimination out of your country, because you can say, okay, I can deal with it because it's not my country. I think maybe it's easier. I don't know, but what I can say I think that the situation for all migrants, because finally people need to move because they can't solve the situation, the equation in their country. And about integration, and I think this is a huge question, and generally we see when we talk about how migrants integrate in the host countries, and I think the point of integration is psychological and economic, both psychological and economic, because people, when they go, they don't speak the language generally. In this case, Haitian, they don't speak Spanish. So they need to be able to talk with someone. And they're gonna talk with people from Haiti. And generally, they live together because they need to live together, because they are, from a psychological standpoint, they can help each other to navigate the situation. And in the economical realm, they only can live together because they live mostly in shanty town and houses that only they need to be together in order to pay a room and to send money back to the family in the home countries. So they are mostly forced to be together because the only thing they can do is it be together. So I think for the first generation, it's very complicated, but I some cases of marriage between Haitian and Chilean, and some they have sending their children to schools. But I think as Jose Miguel was saying, for the first generation, it's complicated because everything are pulling them to be together, and it's not easy. And the other thing, the question was where they came from. The Haitian in Chile generally from Gonaïves, as in general, on the northeast of Haiti. And where are they settling? They are in general in Santiago. Many are working also in the south because they work as in farms. They pick fruits, they vegetables, etc., etc. That's where they are living. The other question was.
Let me go to some other questions that I have here at the chat, and we'll come back to you, Maria Luisa, in a little bit. Lisa Picard again talks about asks about how the anti-immigrant rhetoric in the United States has impacted the migrants' thoughts or attitudes about migration in the receiving countries. And Francisco Javier Ortega also asks Jose Miguel about Costa Rica. Is it my own country? With a high proportion of the population leaving the country, where is Venezuela and Cuba, which these were countries with a tradition of leaving the countries. Is that the case? And he would like to pick that up as well. How is this going to happen? What's the relationship between Cuba, Venezuela, and the current trends of migrations? How is it different or similar to the ones from Central America? Jose Miguel, I'll come back to you, Maria Luisa, very shortly.
Thank you, Presidente. About whether the anti-immigrant rhetoric has impacted the thoughts and attitudes of migrants or potential migrants in Central America, I would say not in the magnitude that you would expect, right? There are some people who are having second thoughts about migrating, but the majority, I would say, and that's basically my impression, the majority still think on coming if they have the opportunity of coming to the United States. They are not coming basically because the current government, the current administration has been very, very effective in putting all possible obstacles for that, right? Even getting the collaboration of the Central American governments to avoid migration, and even criminalizing migration inside the countries, right? One of the things that surprised me is in the pilot study we did in Mexico, and when we talk about this with many of the migrants, whether they felt deterred of continuing on coming to the United States because of the rhetoric of Trump, because of the way Trump talked about migrants. They said, well, they recognize this kind of anti-immigrant climate that seems to exist in the United States, but for them, it couldn't be worse than living in their own countries. Even this climate is not as bad as facing the threats, the few odds of survival that they have in their own countries. So basically, they were comparing the possibility of survival in the United States against basically being killed or end up in prison in Central America. Now about the Costa Rica case. Well, Costa Rica is not a country of migrants, rather, and I have the former president of Costa Rica here to correct me. But basically, they are a receiving country, right? And basically, Costa Rica has a very different profile from the rest of Central America, and Costa Rica has been receiving especially Nicaraguan migrants. It's it's a huge Nicaraguan community of migrants in Costa Rica. And when we see the dynamics play out in a different way, actually, Nicaragua and Costa Rica are neighbors, and the recent events in Nicaragua have pushed even more. Have put more pressure for migration of Nicaraguans into Costa Rica, and I will let President Solis to go in deeper on this. Now, Venezuela and Cuba are also good examples of how, the closure of political spaces, or sort of the closing political spaces, basically push many people out as an exit, right? That's what we've seen in Central America, but that's what we have been seeing for decades in the case of Cuba, and we have seen that in Venezuela as well.
Thank you very much, Jose Miguel. Rudy, would you like to make a comment on Lisa's questions regarding the inhibiting nature, or is there an inhibiting factor to Haitian migrants in terms of what they hear in the official rhetoric in the U.S. government?
Yes, I don't think this is, I mean, the rhetoric in these countries, people are thinking about that. At the point that they have decided to leave, they just leave. But I was thinking about this situation of security, crime, etc. And I think we need as scholars to address that in the case of Haiti, because despite the situation, generally there is no, or usually we don't see high level of crime or gang activities in Haiti. Lately, it is different. But in general, Haiti doesn't face this kind of violence, of social violence that we see in Central America, even though in the last 2 or 3 years we have seen gang activities in Haiti. But in general, when they leave, they don't, I never encounter someone talking about the crime situation in Haiti as the reason as why they are leaving. So maybe because of the changes that we are seeing in Haiti, we need to address this situation and try to see if we can try to find some parallel between what we are saying in Central America and what is going on right now in Haiti, but never heard of that. And in general, people, they just want to live. The difference is the obstacles. If it's easier to go to Dominican Republic, they are going to Dominican Republic. And then if it's easier to go to Brazil, they are going to Brazil. So it depends on the when, let's say, on the how they know, because there are orders in this country that are telling them the possibility and the obstacles and everything, and they are making this decision based on what they are hearing from their friends or the family that are already living in these countries.
Thank you, Rudy. I'm going to go back to Maria Luisa, but before I would like just to make a footnote on what Jose Miguel was saying about Costa Rica. So far, Costa Rica has had migrants, of course, and a good bunch of citizens from the Caribbean province of Limon travel to the United States in the 1960s. And we've seen people from the southern part of Costa Rica travel as well. They generally go back to their homes once they've worked in the United States for a number of years. And that has to do with the conditions in the country. But what's interesting about Costa Rica is that it has received a huge amount of migrants, not only from Nicaragua, where the population is very large, We have around 500,000 Nicaraguans living in Costa Rica, which is a country of 5 million people. That's 10% of our population. I mean, if you try to compare proportionally with the United States, it would mean a huge amount of migrants coming into this country, but also from Venezuela, from Colombia, from Cuba. And in fact, we have an article here in this issue of Hemisphere dealing with Nicaraguans in Costa Rica, if you're interested in checking that out. And that population has increased, of course, as a result of the political and economic crisis in Nicaragua over the last 2 or 3 years. Professor Veizaga, you wanted to do make another question?
Dr. Reserve, I really like your research. So I have 3 questions for you. I'm sorry, I'm writing down. Everybody talks, usually when they are talking about migration, they talk in a neutral way, migrants, the migration in general, like, all the bodies are the same, and we know that that's not the case. So could you please tell me about the ratio of the migrants you interview, and also they are in Chile, between women and men? Are we talking about some researchers, they agree there's a feminization of migration. So does it happen with the Haitian community? Also, what about the ages? And what about, how do you say, la escolaridad? How do you say that?
Education
level, the education level, and if they are thinking to go to Chile for stay there, this is the last point, or they are returning migrants. They're coming and go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Veizaga. I see that Professor Ortega also has a question. Javier, would you like to make a question? You're muted, Javier.
Like you, Luis, Guillermo, no question, just a simple comment. First, I'm not an expert in political science. I'm just a botanist working in Fairchild and FIU. But I mean, based on what Jose Miguel say, I mean, clearly it seems whatever happened in Costa Rica is working. And many aspects, remember when I was a teenager and when we had the Sandinista revolution, there was some hope that we were going to follow the track of Costa Rica. Basically a country with no army and with a big real investment in education and in, the way it is. So somehow, if I answer very clearly, there's a way, and I say as a layman, it's a way by which these countries need to have this need or this tragedy of the population leaving the country. And Costa Rica is an example. Why Costa Rica was not able to export their system the same way that Cuba did. Sorry, maybe I'm now changing topic, but for me, it's so clear. I mean, and again, sorry, I'm a botanist. I'm not a political science expert, but as a layman, I just made a comparison. Sorry, maybe it's too much.
No. Very interesting, Javier. We can go back to that issue. Let me say, Maria Luisa, to your question on women, which I think is a very important element. It's a key element in migrations. Women suffer more. They have different challenges. You cannot deal with the women population and the women migrants in the same way you deal with men. They many times they travel with children. So I will let Jose Miguel and Rudy talk about that. But there is an issue in this issue. There is one article written by Alejandra Mora, who's the executive secretary of the Organization of American States Commission on Women, that addresses that issue. So we did picked up the question of women migrants in that special feature in this issue. So Jose Miguel, would you like to address the comments and questions that we've heard?
Just a couple of comments. One in response to Javier's comment. I think that the question should be, rather than why Costa Rica couldn't export its model, is why the rest of Central America and most of Latin America were unable to import the model of Costa Rica, right? And that has to do with specific historic conditions, the way. But I think it has showed the failure of political elites in most countries, especially those in the Northern Triangle of Central America, basically to grab the opportunity, to seize the opportunities that they have had in the last 3 decades, basically to change the course. Nicaragua is a good example of that. And you mentioned, for instance, how the Revolución Sandinista created all these expectations that actually are now completely destroyed, right? But it has to do with, you know, their own decisions of the elites and political will. Now, I think there
Can I
was
ask
another.
only one question only? I understand that Panama is also following the model of Costa Rica, by which they eliminate the army, correct or no? And also Panama is not a country right now, also exporting also outside, basically, a lot of immigrants. So I can see like many things are coming together where you put basically your investment for society. I see, I don't know if it maybe, I'm not, again, I'm a botanist, but that you don't see also from Panama a huge wave of immigrants leaving, and Panama, after basically they kick out Noriega, they don't have army anymore. The same could happen in Costa Rica, which I find really amazing. That's all I want to say. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And just one final comment on the women migration. I think also we tend to see women as and Maria Luisa is right. I mean, there's you know, we have to understand that there is a different experience of migration for women, but there is also this political dimension in women migration. For instance, we have many of the migrants that are coming, especially those that we have interviewed, are coming because their space of risk of the threats are not only coming from the public spaces, but are coming from the private spaces. And the society and the political establishment has been unable to protect them, not only in the public spaces, but especially in the private spaces. And they have no other choice but to leave, because being in their countries, basically living with their own perpetrator, their own aggressor, right? I think, and that's an important point to consider. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to just call your attention on 2 comments from Venante Standback and from Liesl Picard. On the case of Venante saying that she thinks that the rhetoric in the United States is completely false, that she left Haiti when she 20 years old, and it was not for hunger. It was not for physical hunger. It was for intellectual hunger. She wanted to come and study in the United States, hoping to return to Haiti, but that was not possible because of the conditions in the country. And Liesl, regarding appreciating the comments of the participants on the pragmatism that pervades migrations. Rudy, your comments, and after that I'll just close because we are almost at the end of this program. Yes, please go ahead, Rudy.
Yeah, thank you, Professors Maria Luisa and Venante, for your comments, because that give us at least the opportunity to unpack the migrants, because maybe in my presentation I was packing everything and everyone in the same box, and we need to address this situation also, because not many people want to leave Haiti. Many people are leaving Haiti, even though mostly they are poor people and people that are affected by the by natural disasters and economical disasters, etc. But we have people from a better economical situation that are living also. And again, you know that, and sometimes for the people from the middle class, the political instability helps explain more the decision to move outside the country than the dire economical situation. And that's a point that it's interesting to make, because not all people are living for the same reason. Even though in the Haitian case, we know the majority now are going to Chile, to the South America, because of the economical situation. And talking about women, in general, there are more men. And at the beginning, it was more men. There were more men going to Chile and to South America. And lately, they have been moving with their families also. But even in this situation, the change, we see more men leaving the country, because when you talk to these migrants, you see that also. It's an investment. They are investing. And in Haiti, and they usually say that we have a matriarchal society in Haiti. Women are the key for the Haitian society. So the women, they stay behind with the children and the family, and sometimes they have businesses, and they keep going while the men have to move to see if they can later change the situation. But we don't have time. We could talk also about xenophobia and racism, and women experience differently, as President Solis was saying. This is different. We saw in a couple of cases in Chile, for example, a woman that left her children because she couldn't explain to the social worker a situation, because she left the children alone. We saw another one that died in a public transport, etc. The experiences are different. But again, thank you for pointing out these differences that sometimes we don't have time to make in our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Reserve. Thank you very much, Jose Miguel Cruz, and all of you who attended this activity that is the first of 3 to discuss the contents of our latest issue of the review of the journal Hemisphere. I invite you to check this latest number online at lac.fiu.edu. You have the version, the electronic version there. Jose Miguel is showing it there. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Liesl Picard, who is our editor, also an associate editor of Hemisphere. Without her support, this issue and other issues would have not been possible. She takes the hard job of edition, which is very difficult with her team. And I would also like to invite you to join us for our next seminar on this issue. We will be announcing it in due course. So thank you very much. Merci tú. Muchas gracias. Que pasen muy bien.
Thank you.
Thank you.